What if the heart of the Vatican concealed a truth so profound it could shatter the foundations of faith itself? In the hallowed halls of Casa Santa Marta, a humble abode tucked within the ancient weathered walls of Vatican City, a secret lay buried beneath the weight of centuries, its whispers echoing through the sacred silence. Could a man of such divine authority, Pope Francis, the shepherd of over 1 billion souls, have walked a path so humble that it veiled a revolution waiting to be unleashed upon a church steeped in tradition? For an institution draped in the opulence of gilded altars and ancient rituals, his choice to reject luxury whispered a message that reverberated far beyond the sacred borders of Rome. A message that seemed to ask, what does true holiness look like in a world of shadows? Will you dare to peer into the darkness to uncover the hidden legacy he left behind? A legacy that could redefine the very essence of faith. In an era where power often cloaks itself in grandeur, one man's quiet defiance set the stage for a battle that would ripple through time, its echoes felt in the hearts of the faithful across the globe. Beneath the surface of his modest life, a storm was brewing, a storm of truth, a storm of justice, a storm that would test the very soul of the Catholic Church and challenge the foundations upon which it stood. In the twilight of his papacy, Pope Francis, the Vicar of Christ, chose not the gilded halls of the Apostolic Palace with its marble floors and frescoed ceilings, but the unassuming walls of Casa Santa Marta, a modest guest house nestled within the heart of Vatican City. Unlike the opulence expected of a pontiff, his residence was a testament to simplicity. A single wooden crucifix hung on the wall, its grain worn smooth by time, a small statue of the Virgin Mary, gazing down with a serene sorrow, and a sparse room that spoke more of a monk's cell than a monarch's chamber. The air within those walls carried a faint scent of aged wood and sacred silence, as if the very space held its breath guarding secrets, yet to be revealed secrets that had been whispered in the stillness of countless nights. The world watched in awe as this man cloaked in white dined not in private splendor, but in the communal hall with clergy and pilgrims, his laughter a gentle melody that mingled with theirs, his presence a bridge between the divine and the human. He drove a humble green Ford Focus, its paint chipped and faded, shunning the bulletproof limousines that symbolized the Vatican's separation from the flock, a choice that whispered softly, I am one of you. The sun filtered through the narrow windows of Casa Santa Marta, casting soft beams of golden light that danced across the worn wooden floor, illuminating the simplicity of the space with a warmth that seemed almost divine. The walls, painted a muted cream, bore the faint cracks of time, each line a silent witness to the countless prayers that had been whispered within these rooms, prayers that had risen like incense to the heavens. A single chair, its wood polished smooth by years of use, sat beside a small desk where Francis penned his thoughts. The scratch of his quill, a quiet rhythm against the backdrop of Vatican City's distant hum, a sound that carried the weight of his burden. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled their deep, resonant tones reverberating through the air, a call to prayer that mingled with the scent of incense drifting from the nearby chapel, a scent that clung to the air like a sacred memory. Each morning, Francis would kneel before the crucifix, his knees pressing into the cold, unyielding floor, his hands clasped tightly as he sought the strength to lead a church burdened by its own history, his lips moving in silent supplication as the first light of dawn painted the room in hues of gold and amber. The air in Casa Santa Marta was often heavy with the scent of wax and prayer, the faint flicker of a candle casting shadows that danced across the walls, as if the room itself were alive with the spirit of those who had knelt there before. The window overlooked St. Peter's Square, where the faithful gathered each day, their voices rising in a chorus of hope and devotion, a sound that often brought tears to Francis's eyes, his heart swelling with a love that transcended the boundaries of time and space. He would stand at that window, his hands pressed against the cool glass, watching as the sun rose over the square, its light reflecting off the cobblestones in a shimmer of gold, a reminder of the divine presence that guided his every step. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and the distant aroma of bread, baking in the trattorias that lined the streets of Rome, a city that pulsed with life even as it held the weight of history in its ancient stones. But what if this humility, this rejection of grandeur, was not merely a reflection of faith, but a shield for a greater purpose, a purpose that would only come to light after his passing? Pope Francis, who passed into eternity on April 21st, 2025 at the age of 88, following a stroke, a coma, and ultimately heart failure, left behind a legacy that defied expectation, a legacy that would challenge the very foundations of the church he loved. His 12 years as pontiff were marked by a radical devotion to the poor, a devotion that echoed the words of Christ, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Matthew 25:40. From his days as a cardinal in Buenos Aires, where he rode public buses and cooked his own meals in a small cluttered kitchen, to his papacy, where he rejected luxury, at every turn Francis lived as a servant among his people, his heart attuned to the cries of the marginalized. In Buenos Aires, the air was thick with the scent of diesel and the chatter of street vendors. As he boarded the bus each morning, his simple black cassock a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos around him. The colors of the market stalls a blur of reds, yellows, and greens. He would sit among the workers, the mothers, the children, listening to their stories with a quiet intensity, his eyes crinkling with warmth as he offered a word of comfort or a shared laugh, his presence a balm to their weary hearts. The bus rattled along the cobblestone streets, its engine groaning with the weight of its passengers, and Francis would gaze out the window watching as the city unfolded before him, its beauty and its brokenness intertwined like threads in a tapestry. He would often pray silently, his lips moving in a rhythm as old as faith itself, asking for the strength to serve, to love, to heal. What does it mean to walk among the poor, to see the face of Christ in every suffering soul? In the Vatican, he continued this tradition, walking the cobblestone paths of Vatican City, his steps slow and deliberate, his gaze often turning to the heavens, as if seeking guidance from above the air, cool against his skin as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The faithful would gather as he passed, their hands outstretched, their voices calling out in a chorus of gratitude and hope, and Francis would pause to bless them, his hands gentle as he traced the sign of the cross, his eyes filled with a compassion that seemed to pierce the soul. The air was filled with the scent of roses from the Vatican gardens, their petals a soft crimson against the green, a reminder of the beauty that could be found even in the midst of struggle. He would often stop to kneel beside a child, his white robes pooling on the ground, his voice soft as he whispered words of encouragement, his presence a living testament to the love of Christ. Yet within the quiet of Casa Santa Marta, a storm was brewing, a storm of truth that would challenge the very foundations of the church he led. On the day of his passing, the Vatican sealed Casa Santa Marta with a swiftness that sent whispers echoing through Rome's ancient streets, the air thick with the scent of rain and the murmur of voices as the news spread like wildfire. The guards moved with a precision that spoke of urgency, their boots echoing against the stone floors as they secured the entrance, their faces set in grim determination, their eyes shadowed with a knowledge they could not share. The air grew heavy with questions, each one a shadow cast upon the light of Francis's legacy, a shadow that seemed to grow darker with each passing moment. What secrets lay behind those locked doors sealed with a heavy iron bolt that gleamed in the dim light of the corridor? What truths did the Vatican fear might come to light, truths that could unravel the very fabric of the church? The silence of that sealed room was not a silence of peace, but a silence pregnant with the weight of hidden revelations, a silence that seemed to murmur, "The truth will not stay buried forever." The room itself was a sanctuary of simplicity, its walls unadorned, save for the crucifix and the statue of the Virgin Mary, whose serene gaze seemed to watch over the space with a quiet sorrow, her hands outstretched as if in supplication. The bed, a narrow frame with a thin mattress, bore the imprint of Francis's body, a testament to the countless nights he had spent in prayer. His knees pressed against the cold, unyielding floor as he sought the strength to carry his burden, his breath a soft whisper in the stillness. A small window overlooked St. Peter's Square, where the faithful gathered each day, their voices rising in a chorus of hope and devotion, a sound that often brought tears to Francis's eyes, his heart swelling with a love that transcended the boundaries of time and space. He had once said, "My brothers are poor, and I am one of them," a declaration that echoed through his every action, from his refusal of luxury to his tireless advocacy for the marginalized, his voice a clarion call in a world that too often turned away from the suffering of the least. But what if this humility was a mask for a deeper mission? a mission that would only come to light after his passing, a mission that would challenge the very foundations of the church he loved. For years, Pope Francis had walked a path of humility, but within the confines of his modest office, he waged a silent war against the darkness that had long festered within the church, a darkness that had cast a shadow over the light of Christ's teachings. Insiders whispered of confidential files, documents detailing corruption, abuse, and hidden power structures that had operated in the shadows of the Vatican for decades, their tendrils reaching into the farthest corners of the Catholic world. These were not mere rumors, but truths locked away in drawers guarded by sophisticated security systems, known only to a select few, their existence a closely guarded secret that weighed heavily on Francis's heart. Letters to world leaders, bold calls for justice, and meticulous records of church scandals were penned in his own hand, each word a testament to his unwavering commitment to reform, each stroke of his quill a silent prayer for the soul of the church. The air in that office was heavy with the scent of ink and parchment, the rustle of paper a constant companion as Francis worked late into the night, his brow furrowed with the weight of the truths he uncovered, his eyes burning with a fire that refused to be extinguished. He wrote to leaders of nations, his words a plea for justice, a call to action that often influenced international religious policy, each letter sealed with a wax emblem of the papal crest, its weight a symbol of the authority he wielded, an authority he used not for power, but for truth. But why had he kept these truths hidden, locked away in the shadows of Casa Santa Marta? What might happen if the light of truth were to pierce the darkness of secrecy, illuminating the sins that had been buried for so long? The answer came with a discovery that would shake the foundations of the Catholic Church, a discovery that would bring the shadows into the light and force the world to confront the truth. David Moretti, a respected religious historian devoted to uncovering the Church's hidden truths, was invited to the Vatican to catalog Francis's legacy, his heart heavy with the weight of the task before him. Within the unassuming walls of Casa Santa Marta, beneath a simple rug and concealed under the wooden floor, he found a locked metal box, a vessel of secrets that Francis had guarded with his life, its surface cold and unyielding, its weight a testament to the burden it carried. The air in that room grew thick with anticipation as Moretti opened the box, revealing hundreds of precisely organized documents, each marked with Francis's handwritten notes in Spanish, Italian, and Latin. The ink faded, but the words still sharp with the clarity of truth. The scent of old paper and ink filled the space, a fragrance that carried the weight of decades of hidden pain, a pain that seemed to seep into the very air around him. These were not ordinary records, they were a testament to the Church's darkest sins, sins that had been buried for far too long. The documents exposed a web of corruption that stretched from the Vatican Bank to the farthest reaches of the Catholic world, a web that had ensnared even those who had sworn to serve Christ. Millions meant for charitable aid had been funneled into Swiss accounts and offshore tax havens, with names of bishops and senior officials listed alongside clear evidence of embezzlement, their greed, a betrayal of the poor they had vowed to protect. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but legible, each line a damning indictment of those who had betrayed the Church's mission. Each word a cry for justice that had gone unanswered for too long. Other files detailed a chilling abuse of power cardinals and bishops who had concealed sexual abuse by relocating accused priests, allowing the cycle of suffering to continue unchecked, their actions a stain on the sanctity of the Church. One page written in Francis's own hand bore the heartbreaking words, "They refused the light of truth," a cry of anguish as he faced resistance to his pleas for reform, his heart breaking with the weight of the pain he could not heal. The most chilling revelation was a coded list referencing a covert faction within the Vatican known as Secolo Nero, a secretive group accused of shielding powerful figures and blocking Francis's efforts at reform, their influence a dark shadow over the light of Christ's teachings. If the truth can shake the Vatican to its core, what might it do to your own faith? Moretti's hands trembled as he turned the pages, his breath shallow as he absorbed the weight of what he had uncovered, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and dread. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, the silence oppressive as the truth unfolded before him, each document a piece of a puzzle that revealed a church in crisis. He could almost hear the echoes of Francis's prayers, the whispered pleas for guidance that had filled this space night after night, the weight of those prayers pressing against his chest like a stone. The documents were a testament to the Pope's anguish, his determination to confront the Church's darkest truths, and his fear of what might happen if those truths were revealed too soon, a fear that had kept him silent even as his heart cried out for justice. Moretti knew that what he held in his hands was a Pandora's box, a collection of secrets that could either save the Church or destroy it, a truth that could either heal or wound. What would you do with a truth so powerful it could change everything? What does it mean to bear the light of truth when the darkness is so vast? As Moretti's findings were published, the world reeled at the revelations, the air thick with the scent of newsprint and the murmur of voices as the story spread across continents. In churches from Buenos Aires to Berlin, the faithful gathered, their faces etched with concern as they whispered prayers for the Church, their rosaries clutched tightly in their hands, the beads worn smooth by years of devotion. The Vatican remained silent, its walls impenetrable, its secrets guarded by centuries of tradition. But the publication of the documents was a crack in that facade, a sign that the shadows within the Church were stirring, unwilling to let the light of truth shine. But the historian's triumph was short-lived, a fleeting moment of victory overshadowed by a darkness that refused to be dispelled. In a twist that sent shivers through the faithful, David Moretti vanished without a trace, his disappearance, a chilling reminder of the power of the shadows he had dared to confront. His social media accounts, research files, and digital backups were wiped clean, as if he had been erased from existence, leaving behind only whispers of his name and the echo of his discovery. The air grew heavy with suspicion. Had the Vatican silenced him to protect its secrets, or was this the work of a darker force, a force that feared the light he had brought into the darkness? Whispers began to circulate, and one name emerged from the shadows: Luis Antonio Tagle. The man Francis had quietly prepared to carry forward his vision, a man whose name now carried the weight of both hope and suspicion. Was Tagle complicit in Moretti's disappearance, a pawn in a game of power he could not control, or was he the next target in a battle that had only just begun, a battle for the soul of the Church itself? The silence that followed was deafening, a silence that seemed to murmur, "The truth comes at a price that Moretti had paid with his very existence." The streets of Rome buzzed with speculation, the air thick with the scent of espresso and the murmur of voices as news of Moretti's disappearance spread the city's ancient stones, seeming to hold their breath as the storm gathered strength. In St. Peter's Square, the faithful gathered, their faces etched with concern as they whispered prayers for the Church, their rosaries clutched tightly in their hands, the beads clicking softly as they prayed for light in the darkness. What does it mean to seek the truth when the cost is so great? What does it mean to stand for justice when the shadows are so deep? Luis Antonio Tagle, born on June 21, 1957 in Manila, to a humble family of deep faith, had long been a beacon of compassion in a world of power, his heart shaped by the teachings of Christ and the struggles of the poor. Raised in a home where the rosary was a nightly ritual, Tagle's childhood was filled with the scent of jasmine and the soft glow of candlelight as his family gathered each evening to pray, their voices rising in unison as they sought the intercession of the Blessed Mother, their faith a shield against the hardships of life. The air in that small, cluttered room was warm with the scent of rice cooking on the stove, the walls adorned with a simple crucifix and a faded image of the Sacred Heart, its colors softened by time. Tagle often recalled those nights, the warmth of his mother's hand in his, the quiet strength of his father's faith, a foundation that would guide him through the challenges to come, a foundation that would anchor him in the storm that was to come. As Archbishop of Manila, he rode a bicycle to celebrate Mass in impoverished neighborhoods, the dust of the streets clinging to his robes as he knelt to pray, with families living in shanties, their faces lined with the weight of poverty, their eyes bright with the hope he brought. He declined the comforts of the episcopal palace, choosing instead a simple room with a single bed, a small desk, and a crucifix that had been a gift from his mother, its wood worn smooth by the touch of her hands. The air in those shanties was thick with the scent of charcoal and the murmur of voices as Tagle sat among the families, his robes a stark contrast to the tattered clothes of those around him, his voice soft as he spoke of God's love, his hands gentle as he blessed the children who gathered at his feet. He would often stay late into the night, the stars a canopy of light above him, the air cool against his skin as he listened to the stories of those who had been forgotten by the world. their voices a chorus of pain and hope that echoed in his heart. He would pray with them, his knees pressed into the dirt, his voice rising in a litany of hope, asking for the strength to serve, to love, to heal. What does it mean to walk among the poor, to see the face of Christ in every suffering soul? What does it mean to be a shepherd in a world that has lost its way? His rise to cardinal and eventual appointment as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples in 2019 placed him at the heart of Vatican power, a position Francis had carefully orchestrated, a position that would test Tagle's faith and resolve. Tagle was not merely a confidant. He was the heir to a dream, the one chosen to complete Francis's quiet revolution, a revolution that would challenge the very foundations of the Church. Francis had seen in Tagle a reflection of his own heart, a man who understood the struggles of the poor, who had walked among them, who had lived a life of service rather than power, a man who could carry forward the vision of a church renewed in the image of Christ. Their meetings in the Vatican were marked by a quiet intimacy, the air filled with the scent of incense, and the soft murmur of their voices as they discussed the future of the Church, their words a prayer for a world in need of healing. Francis would often place a hand on Tagle's shoulder, his eyes filled with a fatherly warmth as he spoke of the challenges ahead. His voice a low whisper that carried the weight of his burden. "You understand the shadows," he once said, his voice trembling with emotion, "but you also know the light. Do not be afraid." What does it mean to carry a vision that could change the world, knowing that the cost may be your own life? But the path Francis had laid for Tagle was fraught with peril, a path strewn with the thorns of resistance and the shadows of deceit. The documents Moretti uncovered revealed a church riddled with corruption, money laundering through the Vatican bank exploitation in Africa and Latin America, and a systematic cover-up of abuse that spanned decades, a web of sin that had ensnared even those who had sworn to serve Christ. Over 120 testimonies from victims across the globe, some dating back to the 1980s, bore the signatures of bishops who had silenced survivors with threats and manipulation their actions, a betrayal of the trust placed in them by the faithful. The air in Moretti's office as he pored over these testimonies was heavy with the scent of dust and despair, the weight of each story pressing against his chest like a stone, his heart aching with the pain of those who had suffered in silence. Letters from survivors written in trembling hands described the pain of being silenced, the fear of retribution, and the longing for justice. Their words a cry that echoed through the years, a cry that had gone unanswered for far too long. One letter penned by a woman from Chile ended with a plea, "I pray that God will send someone to hear us, to see us, to help us heal her words," a prayer that had finally found its answer in the documents Francis had left behind. Francis's notes scribbled in the margins revealed his anguish, his heart laid bare in the ink that stained the pages. "If we reveal everything, the church could collapse. But if we remain silent, my soul cannot rest." He had wrestled with a choice to expose the truth and risk the church's collapse, or to wait for the right moment, a moment that never came before his death, a moment that now rested in Tagle's hands. The air in Casa Santa Marta seemed to hold the echo of his prayers, the whispered pleas for guidance that had filled the space. Night after night, the weight of those prayers pressing against Tagle's heart as he stood in the room where Francis had once knelt. Francis had known the power of the truth he held, but he also knew the fragility of the church he loved, a church that had been wounded by its own sins, a church that needed healing more than ever. He had chosen to wait to prepare Tagle to plant the seeds of reform that would one day bear fruit, seeds that would grow in the fertile soil of faith, nurtured by the light of truth. But the harvest would come at a cost, and Tagle would be the one to pay at a cost that would test the very limits of his faith. Tagle now stood at a crossroads, holding the weight of Francis's legacy in his hands, his heart heavy with the burden of the truth he had inherited. The documents were a ticking time bomb, a blueprint for reform that could either save the church or destroy it, a truth that could either heal or wound. He began with quiet, deliberate steps, positioning allies within the Vatican's financial institutions, initiating external audits, and urging the Economic Council to review dioceses shadowed by abuse, his every move a testament to the courage that burned within him. The air in those meetings was thick with tension, the scent of old leather and wax mingling with the murmur of voices as Tagle presented his proposals, his voice steady despite the weight of the opposition he faced. Bishops retired under the guise of health issues, their faces pale as they left the room, knowing that the truth they had hidden for so long was coming to light, their footsteps echoing in the marble halls as they retreated into the shadows. Forgotten abuse records resurfaced their pages, yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the pain still fresh in the words of those who had suffered, their voices rising like a chorus from the past, demanding to be heard. Tagle's resolve grew stronger, with each move his voice a quiet thunder, as he pushed for transparency in the Vatican Bank, demanding public financial reports and independent oversight, his words a clarion call for justice that reverberated through the hearts of the faithful. The money of the poor cannot be stolen, he declared, his voice echoing through the marble halls of the Vatican, a call to justice that reverberated through the hearts of the faithful, a call that could not be ignored. The air in the Vatican Bank was heavy with the scent of polished wood and the rustle of papers as Tagle's allies began their audits, their pens scratching against the pages as they uncovered the truth, their faces set in grim determination as they traced the path of the stolen funds. Millions that had been meant for the poor widows in Africa, orphans in Latin America, refugees in Europe, had been siphoned away, hidden in accounts that bore the names of those who had sworn to serve Christ. Their greed, a betrayal of the mission they had vowed to uphold. Tagle's heart ached as he read the reports, the weight of betrayal pressing against his chest like a stone, his eyes burning with tears as he thought of the suffering that had been caused by those who had turned away from the light. What does it mean to serve the poor when the church itself has stolen from them? What does it mean to be a shepherd when the flock has been betrayed? Yet the shadows within the Vatican were not so easily dispelled, their tendrils reaching deep into the heart of the church, their influence a dark cloud over the light of reform. Secolo Nero, the secretive faction Francis had feared, mobilized against Tagle, their influence stretching from Rome to the wealthiest elites in Europe and the US, their power a force that could not be underestimated. The air in their clandestine meetings was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and the murmur of conspiratorial voices as they plotted to preserve their power, their faces shadowed in the dim light of their chambers. Conservative cardinals, fearing Tagle's vision of decentralization, rallied behind a more predictable candidate for the upcoming papal conclave, their voices a chorus of resistance that echoed through the halls of the Vatican. Whispers turned to threats, meetings canceled without explanation, budgets slashed with a stroke of a pen, proposals for reform buried in bureaucratic red tape, each move a silent sabotage designed to tighten the noose around Tagle's reform. In the Vatican, silence was deadlier than any sword, and Tagle knew that if he fell, Francis's vision would be buried forever, a vision that had been nurtured in the quiet of Casa Santa Marta, a vision that now rested in his hands. The streets of Rome buzzed with tension, the air thick with the scent of rain and the murmur of voices as the faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square, their prayers rising like incense to the heavens, their faces etched with hope and fear. The Vatican's walls, ancient and unyielding, seemed to hold their breath as if waiting for the storm to break their stones, bearing the weight of centuries of secrets. Tagle walked those cobblestone paths each morning, his steps slow and deliberate, his gaze often turning to the heavens as he sought the strength to carry on, the air cool against his skin as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He would pause at the edge of the square, his eyes tracing the lines of St. Peter's Basilica, its dome a silent sentinel over the city, its beauty a reminder of the faith that had sustained the church through centuries of trial. The air was filled with the scent of roses from the Vatican gardens, their petals a soft crimson against the green, a reminder of the beauty that could be found even in the midst of struggle, a beauty that Tagle clung to as he faced the darkness ahead. What does it mean to stand for truth in a world that thrives on shadows? As the psalmist reminds us, the Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Psalm 27:1. Tagle's mission was not one of power, but of service, a call to dismantle the corruption that had plagued the church for generations, a call to restore the church to its true mission. He proposed an independent organization to support abuse survivors, giving them a voice to question the clergy who had silenced them, a radical shift that could return moral authority to the voiceless, a shift that could heal the wounds of the past. The air in the meetings where he presented this proposal was thick with disbelief, the scent of old parchment and wax mingling with the murmur of shocked voices as cardinals and bishops grappled with the implications of Tagle's vision. Survivors long silenced by fear and shame would be given a platform to speak, to heal, to demand justice, their voices rising like a chorus from the ashes of their pain, a chorus that could not be ignored. Tagle's vision was a church where the wounded were heard, where the broken were restored, where the teachings of Christ were lived out, in truth, a church that reflected the heart of its founder. But the darkness of Secolo Nero loomed large, a test of Tagle's resolve that would determine the future of the church, a test that would push him to the very limits of his faith. The world now watches in suspense as the papal conclave approaches the air, thick with anticipation as the faithful gather in churches across the globe, their prayers a chorus of hope and longing. Will Luis Antonio Tagle become the first pope from Asia, carrying forward Francis's quiet revolution? Or will the weight of tradition crush the hope of reform, leaving the church to languish in the shadows of its past? The secrets of Casa Santa Marta, once hidden beneath a rug, now cast a light that cannot be extinguished, a light that shines through the cracks of the Vatican's walls, illuminating the path to a new era. They hold the power to usher in a new era for Catholicism, one of transparency, justice, and global relevance, an era where the church can once again be a beacon of hope for the world. As Jesus taught, the truth will set you free. John 8:32, but at what cost? Will Tagle emerge as the shepherd of a renewed church, or will the shadows of power prevail, leaving Francis's legacy to fade into silence, a legacy that had been nurtured in the quiet of Casa Santa Marta, a legacy that now rested in Tagle's hands? The battle for the soul of the church has only just begun, and you stand at the threshold of its unfolding, a witness to a moment that could change the course of history. The documents Francis left behind are more than a record of past sins. They are a call to action, a plea for justice that echoes through the ages, a plea that Tagle now carries in his heart. Tagle's journey is not one of ambition, but of duty, a duty to honor the vision of a man who dared to live as Christ did, among the poor, the broken, the forgotten, a man who saw the face of Christ in every suffering soul. The air within the Vatican grows heavy with anticipation as the forces of tradition and reform collide in a silent war that will shape the future of faith, a war that will test the very limits of Tagle's resolve. What does it mean to bear the light of truth in a world that fears its brilliance? Tagle's every step is a testament to the courage required to stand against corruption, to speak for the voiceless, to rebuild what has been broken, his heart guided by the teachings of Christ and the spirit of Francis. The testimonies of abuse survivors hidden for decades now whisper through the cracks of the Vatican's walls, demanding to be heard, their voices a chorus of pain and hope that cannot be silenced. The financial records exposing millions stolen from the poor cry out for justice, their pages a testament to the betrayal of the church's mission, a betrayal that Tagle is determined to right. And the coded list of Secolo Nero, a shadowy faction that has long held the church in its grip, stands as a challenge to Tagle's resolve, a challenge that will test the very limits of his faith. Will he dismantle this darkness, or will it consume him as it has so many before leaving the church to languish in the shadows of its past? The Vatican's history is a tapestry of light and shadow, woven with threads of faith and power, a tapestry that has been stained by the sins of those who sought to serve themselves rather than Christ. For centuries, the church has stood as a beacon of hope for millions, yet its halls have also harbored secrets that have caused untold pain, secrets that have wounded the very soul of the church. Francis, in his quiet way, sought to unravel this tapestry, to weave a new one that reflected the true teachings of Christ, a tapestry woven with threads of humility, justice, and love. His choice of Casa Santa Marta was not merely a rejection of luxury, it was a declaration that the church must return to its roots, to the simplicity and humility of its founder, a declaration that echoed through his every action, a declaration that now rests in Tagle's hands. But the path to reform is fraught with peril, and Francis knew that his time was limited, that the work he had begun would need to be carried forward by another, a man who shared his vision, a man who could face the darkness and emerge into the light. In Tagle, he saw a reflection of his own heart, a man who understood the struggles of the poor, who had walked among them, who had lived a life of service rather than power, a man who could carry forward the vision of a church renewed in the image of Christ. Tagle's rise was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, a seed planted in the fertile soil of faith, nurtured by Francis's guidance, a seed that would grow into a tree of justice and love its branches, reaching out to the world. But the soil of the Vatican is rocky, and the seeds of reform are often choked by the weeds of tradition, their growth stunted by the shadows of power. The conservative forces within the church, those who have long held power, see Tagle not as a savior, but as a threat, a man who could dismantle the structures they have fought to preserve, a man who could bring the light of truth into the darkness they have cultivated. The whispers of resistance grow louder with each passing day, their voices a chorus of dissent that echoes through the halls of the Vatican, a chorus that seeks to drown out the light of reform. Conservative Catholic outlets, such as LifeSite News and Church Militant, have begun to publish stories questioning Tagle's past, reviving old rumors of financial scandals in Manila. Rumors long dismissed but now wielded as weapons to sow doubt, their words a poison that seeps into the hearts of the faithful. In the Vatican, a whisper can be more deadly than a shout, and Tagle knows that his enemies will stop at nothing to derail his mission, their power, a force that cannot be underestimated. Meetings are canceled without explanation, budgets are slashed with a stroke of a pen, proposals for reform are buried in bureaucratic red tape. Each move a silent sabotage designed to tighten the noose around Tagle's reform, a noose that threatens to choke the life from the vision Francis entrusted to him. The air in the Vatican is thick with tension, the scent of old parchment and wax mingling with the murmur of voices, as the battle for the soul of the church unfolds, a battle that will test the very limits of Tagle's faith. The stakes are higher than ever, for the outcome of this silent war will echo far beyond the walls of the Vatican, its ripples felt in the hearts of the faithful across the globe. The future of over 1 billion Catholics and the Church's influence on global issues like human rights, poverty, and climate change hangs in the balance, a future that could either shine with the light of justice or be shrouded in the darkness of tradition. If Tagle succeeds, the Church could enter a new era, one where transparency and justice prevail, where the voiceless are heard, and where the teachings of Christ are lived out. In truth, a church that reflects the heart of its founder. But if he fails, the shadows of Secolo Nero will deepen, and the hope of reform will be buried beneath centuries of silence, a hope that Francis had nurtured in the quiet of Casa Santa Marta, a hope that now rests in Tagle's hands. What does it mean to fight for justice in a world that fears change? As the Apostle Paul reminds us, we do not lose heart, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. 2 Corinthians 4:16-17. Tagle's journey is a testament to the power of faith in the face of adversity, a testament to the courage required to stand for truth in a world that thrives on shadows. His humility, his compassion, and his unwavering commitment to the poor mirror the life of Christ, who came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Mark 10:45, a life that Tagle seeks to emulate in every step he takes. Yet like Christ, Tagle faces opposition from those who cling to power, who fear the light of truth, their resistance a storm that threatens to engulf him. The disappearance of David Moretti is a chilling reminder of the lengths to which these forces will go to protect their secrets, a reminder that the path to reform is fraught with peril, a path that Tagle must walk with courage and faith. But Tagle is not alone. The spirit of Francis, the prayers of the faithful, and the cries of the oppressed stand with him, urging him to press forward, their voices a chorus of hope that echoes through the ages, a chorus that cannot be silenced. The papal conclave looms on the horizon, a moment of reckoning that will determine the future of the Church, a moment that will test the very limits of Tagle's resolve. Will Tagle emerge as the first pope from Asia, a symbol of hope for a new era, or will the conservative forces prevail, choosing a candidate who will preserve the status quo, leaving the Church to languish in the shadows of its past? The documents hidden in Casa Santa Marta, once sealed beneath a wooden floor, now cast a light that cannot be extinguished, a light that shines through the cracks of the Vatican's walls, illuminating the path to a new era. They are a call to action, a plea for justice, and a blueprint for a church that reflects the heart of Christ, a church that Tagle is determined to build no matter the cost. But the path to that future is narrow, and Tagle must walk it with courage, wisdom, and an unwavering faith in the God who sees all, knows all, and will one day bring all things to light, a God who has promised to be with him, always, even to the end of the age. What does it mean to be a light in the darkness, to stand for truth when the cost is so great? The secrets of Casa Santa Marta are more than a record of past sins. They are a vision for a future where the Church is a sanctuary for the broken, a voice for the voiceless, and a beacon of hope for the world, a future that Tagle is determined to bring to life. Tagle's mission is to make that vision a reality, to dismantle the structures of corruption and build anew on a foundation of justice and love, a mission that will test the very limits of his faith. But the battle is far from over, and the forces of resistance grow stronger with each passing day, their shadows a dark cloud over the light of reform. Will Tagle's humility be his strength, or will it be his downfall? Will the light of truth prevail, or will the shadows of power swallow it whole, leaving the church to languish in the darkness of its past? The Vatican stands at a crossroads, and the world watches with bated breath, the air thick with anticipation as the faithful gather in churches across the globe, their prayers a chorus of hope and longing. The legacy of Pope Francis, sealed within the walls of Casa Santa Marta, is a testament to the power of faith, humility, and the relentless pursuit of justice, a legacy that Tagle now carries in his heart. Tagle, the man chosen to carry that legacy forward, must now navigate a labyrinth of power and deceit, armed only with the truth and the spirit of the man who came before him, a spirit that shines like a light in the darkness, guiding him through the storm. The future of the church and the faith of billions rests in his hands, a future that could either shine with the light of justice or be shrouded in the darkness of tradition. As the psalmist declares, "Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light on my path." Psalm 119:105. Will Tagle follow that light, or will the darkness prevail, leaving the church to languish in the shadows of its past? The battle for the soul of the church has only just begun, and the world stands at the threshold of its unfolding, a witness to a moment that could change the course of history, a moment that will echo through the ages, a moment that will determine the future of faith itself.